all the code that you write for your CI/CD and for your pipelines is code, meaning it shouldn't be considered differently from the rest of your application code. It's not like, open source is just for projects and it's free, and closed source is just for products and they're commercial. No, I believe this is wrong. We are building an open project and product today with Dagger. And we indeed are building a business alongside it, but I think it works nicely with the open source mindset.
In today's episode, I'm joined by Alba, the co-founder of the Dagger. Dagger is a CI/CD engine that transforms your pipeline, usually a mix of shell scripts and YAML files, into a clean and easy-to-use code. Sam and the same team founded Docker that changed the IT industry forever. Docker is a platform for developing, shipping, and running applications. It has become an industry standard. You can't work in the cloud computing without coming across it. Now the founding team is working on Dagger, which makes a promising attempt to change this industry standard once again. In this episode, you will learn about Dagger and the team's incredible journey that has led them to reshape the cloud computing. My name is Csaba Huszka, and I will be your host. Welcome to the Follow Pattern podcast. Hi Sam, thank you for joining.
Thanks for the invitation. Hello.
So let's talk about the origin of the Dagger. So how did the idea come about?
Dagger is interesting because it's to tell you the story. We didn't start the company with an idea, which is not really common.
Okay.
Most companies nowadays, usually I would say by the book. Companies start with an idea and then you look for people and co-founders, and we did the opposite actually. And I don't know a lot of companies like that, but that's what happened to us. So the story is, after Docker, we had the feeling that something wasn't solved, that containers were just the beginning, and we had to do something, but we didn't know exactly what. And so the only thing we knew is that we wanted to work together. Mm-hmm. And what we ended up doing at the end of 2018 is that we met the three of us, with Solomon and Andrea, and mm-hmm. we decided to form a company together and say, well, let's start something together, and we'll see along the way.
So at that time you didn't know what you guys want to do.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so it was funny because when we were talking outside, a lot of people were interested about what we were going to build. They were like, "Oh yeah, it's Docker V2. It's gonna be awesome." And we actually didn't know what we were going to do. The only thing we knew is that we had to talk to a lot of people. And so we started to do only that in the early days. We talked to people, we interviewed companies, friends of friends, any company in our network who wanted to talk to us. We had actually tons of interviews. I remember some days when we had 10 hours of interviews per day, something like that. It was crazy. Ooh. And we were taking notes. We were asking questions and taking notes. That's the only thing we were doing in the early days. Mm-hmm. And then after a few months and over the weeks, we had a common pattern that was narrowing down weeks after weeks, and it was very interesting. So we zoomed into a problem that we were hearing more and more, and that thing was really in between developing application and running application on prod. Something happens in the middle that is very messy for all companies, small, medium, and large. This thing is called, it has different names. Sometimes it's called CI/CD. Sometimes it's called internal developer platform. Sometimes it's called, I just need to get my shit to the cloud. But basically, it's always the same thing. I'm sure it's familiar because every company we talked to, and it was interesting to see that big companies were just more advanced in solving that problem, but it was the exact same problem that small companies had. And without it's weird that on one side you have very powerful CI systems and infrastructure toolings, and on the other side you have complex and super advanced deployment tools that can do A/B and canary testing and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have some advanced build frameworks and a lot of tools for debugging your applications. But when it's about CI/CD and actually instrumenting all of this and really put together create the glue in between all of those solutions, uh, it comes down to Bash scripts and YAML
Mm-hmm.
workflows, and that's it.
Yes.
Uh, and so that's exactly what Dagger aims to replace today. And so that's the reason why we started the company. I mean, the project and the product
Mm-hmm.
later on.
For listeners who doesn't know what the CI/CD is, how would you explain to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, CI/CD stands for continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment. Um, so what it means is that you have two sides. You have the CI that
Mm-hmm.
continuously integrate your changes and run your tests, and this is where you do all of your validations at the code level and at the app level. So you build your application, you rerun some tests, you run some unit test, which is even before that, to
Mm-hmm.
your code. So all of this is really CI. And then you have the deployment part, which is the part after CI. So usually the input of CI is code. Then
Mm-hmm.
the output is usually a binary or a couple of containers or different
Mm-hmm.
assets that you built at the end of your test if they passed, and all of your validation checks. Some of them could be manual actually. And then you have the deployment phase, which is taking this. So the input is the output of the CI, which is all of those artifacts that were built, and the deployment takes care of deploying those artifacts and those assets to a deployment environment that can be a testing environment, a staging environment, or pre-prod, or even a production environment. And this whole process of CI/CD is really, you can see that as a loop that
Mm-hmm.
constantly runs, pretty much like every time there is a change on the code, like you have to rerun this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole process, like one single loop, can take hours and even days in some companies. And it's
Yes.
very important because this is what's driving the velocity of your deployment team. So as efficient as you can be on this CI/CD loop, it
Mm-hmm.
directly impacts the velocity for the company to ship features and ship value to customers. That's why it's very important, because um, oftentimes we see, we think about optimizing the development process in terms of hiring great engineers,
Mm-hmm.
having great development tools, and then we think about infrastructure cost and speed and scalability and redundancy, but we don't often think about this the efficiency of this loop in the middle, which is really CI/CD, and it's very important. I think more and more, oftentimes now, I see more and more people taking into account and understanding the importance of this loop in between. Because if it's not efficient, obviously, your prod can be awesome, and your development and your developers can be awesome. Like, it will go slow, and it won't be efficient, and you will waste time and money. And
Yeah.
so this is why it's very important for all companies to have a great um, um, and efficient CI/CD loop, actually. And we think that all the code that you write for your CI/CD and for your pipelines is code, meaning
Mm-hmm.
it shouldn't be considered differently from the rest of your application code. And today it's
Mm-hmm.
not the case. In 99.9% of companies, you see the code of the application, usually with a native programming language, and
Mm-hmm.
then you see all of CI/CD, or like an internal platform or something, some sort, which is often a bunch of pieces of custom scripts that are usually not tested themselves, they are considered differently from the actual application. More importance is given to the application itself than to the software that ships this application, which is weird when you think about it.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
and what more and more we see this CI/CD as an actual software factory. It's basically the internal factory that you need to assemble to ship your software efficiently, to ship your product. It's the factory that builds your product. If your factory is not efficient and kind of falls apart, there is absolutely no way to ship a great product.
That's interesting.
And so that's why we believe that you know you should have access to the same performant tools and the same language that you use to build your application every day and that you test and debug, etc., than your CI/CD and actual software factory. And that's why Dagger today allows you to, well, first write your pipeline, your pipeline in a native programming language, so you don't have to start with a YAML pipeline or like a bash a shell command, even like on any CI system. And also you can run this pipeline locally on your local machine. So that's very important because and I'm sure you're familiar with this as a software engineer,
Yes.
but you you ship your code, you run some tests locally, and you're like, oh, what's gonna happen when the CI triggers the whole test suite? And so you submit your pull request, you wait for the CI to kick in, and you usually so you push this code and you usually pray for things that hopefully things will work exactly
Yeah.
the way I expect them to work, knowing that actually I didn't run the whole thing on my machine, right? And with Dagger, given that the pipeline is also containerized, so I didn't mention that, but the fact that you can see a Dagger pipeline as a dependency graph of containers, pretty much. And because all of the steps of your pipeline are configurable, you can actually run them locally. So you can run your whole CI locally, and Dagger will guarantee that it will run exactly the same on your CI infrastructure. So then pushing to your CI and run your test from your pull request, and for reviewing the code with your team coworkers, it becomes like almost a non-event in terms of what changed in between, because you actually are able to run everything locally now.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
the main difference. It really changes the way you work at the end.
I think the best example for me, the best example was from the repository, the open source repository you have on the GitHub was a database. So that's where I really realized that, oh, that's it's really powerful. So I'm able to, so using the Dagger, I'm able to now to scale up a small service of database, and also my web service that I'm just working on, and I can execute a test on that. I can call the API. It could be a REST API or anything, and then it can create a record in the database. I can run a select on that, so I can really verify the actual behavior, not just layers or a combination of layers. I don't have to mock the database now. I can run the actual code, and the result is going to be the same, just in the production. So this is, I think, the best example, or for me, that was the best example to really understand the power of the Dagger.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, thank you. I'm glad that you said that, because we've put a lot of effort into developing a large set of primitives for developers. So indeed, when you start um, uh, testing your code and in writing an integration test, and we often actually write more integration tests than unit tests oftentimes. I mean, I noticed that with development teams. Um, but anyway, it's just Dagger provides. So what you're referring to is probably the use of services. So
Yeah.
Dagger allows you to create a service which is a long running container that will run for the duration of your pipeline, and so you can indeed spin up a real database using the same container image that you would use on production, for instance.
Yes.
and you can spin it up, run your test, tear it down, and sure, some listener might say, well, I've been doing that for forever on my own CI. Sure, great, it's indeed possible to do with other CI system when you spin up a background process. What Dagger allows you to do is really include this service mechanism as part of your CI runtime, so you don't have to create
Yes.
anything custom to make that work. And another advantage is that I think Dagger provides, that I wanted to mention earlier, is the ability to make this code reusable. So for instance, this example that you took, where you
Yeah.
spin up your database, maybe the container image of the database that you use is a public image that other people could use, either, or even an internal image that other people may benefit from inside your company. And what if you have this pipeline that spin up the database, run some tests, and run migrations. You provide some database migration as input, for instance, and it tests the same thing. Well, ideally, you don't want someone else, because it's really a common pattern on the database. Ideally you would like to make this code reusable, so other people could take your pipeline and expand it, exactly like you do with normal code, right, on your application. I never heard, when before Dagger existed, one of the problem we identified, I never heard people who were reusing the code of their CI/CD. It usually never happens. And so now you can take this any piece of pipeline from your Dagger code, turn it into a module, publish it to the Daggerverse, which is a repository, a public index of modules that you can reuse, and then use it. So when you start your pipeline, the result is you don't have to start from scratch, and so that's very that's very, very powerful. I wanted to mention, because it's something we introduced a month ago. It's very quote quote fresh, the Dagger modules,
Yes.
but I think it solves one of the major problems we identified in the early days. It took us a while to solve it though, but yeah, it's available now.
So it's always good when a product can have plugins, because for me it's kind of feels like that. So these modules that we can build as the users, and we can publish in the Daggerverse, it acts like a plugin for a product. Am I correct with
Yep.
that?
Yeah. You're correct. It's modules, plugins, extensions, even drivers. There are a lot of different terms for extending a core. So yeah, it's by so the notion of modules inside Dagger is really a reusable pipeline. That's really
Mhm.
how we see it. We also have a concept of driver, but it's different. It really makes changes the behavior of the core of Dagger, which is different. But yeah, in terms of um, modules, the reason why it's a top level concept on Dagger is because it's actually it acts a bit differently than just a package or a module for a code, something that you would say, for instance, you would use in Python or Go.
Mhm.
The main difference with the Dagger module is that, well, you can write it in your language of choice. It's a
Mhm.
Dagger pipeline pretty much, and but the main difference from what you could see in other languages is that you can actually use this module in other languages. So for instance,
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. Let's say, well, let's take the example of the database again. Like, you have
Okay.
this database, you take a container image, you spin up this database inside the service, you run your integration, you run, let's say, the migrations that you took as input
Mhm.
to this database, and you will return results, whether the migration passed or not after running your
Mhm.
test. So you can take, let's say you wrote this pipeline in Go using the Dagger
Mhm.
API. You turn this into a module, and now you ping me on Discord and say, "Hey Sam, I published something new on the Daggerverse, and actually the database migration that we talked about the other day. Now it's a reusable module that you can use in your CI, and so you don't have to write it again." And so I'd be like, "Oh, great! I'm gonna save some time. I won't have to re-implement that logic." So I basically pull this module, but the thing is, I don't write Go. Well, actually, I do, but let's say for the example, I don't.
Okay.
I use Python, let's say, and or even TypeScript, and so I have my module that is using Python, and I actually used your module that is written in Go, and it works. It actually just works. So it will, by loading a module on my Dagger engine, it will extend the local Dagger API with your module, and will make those functions that you wrote available in the language I use. So Dagger will do the translation between the SDKs, which feels magical, honestly, when you use it, because it just works. And you wrote this code in Go, and I use it from Python, and it works. And there is a reason for it in the way that Dagger is implemented. But I mean, I could dig in on that if you're interested, but I won't go too far answering your point.
I feel like the Dagger is going to replace the unit test, not just the bash or the YAMLs, but it's going to replace the unit test. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I think we are touching a topic that some people might feel sensitive about unit tests versus integration tests. So
Hi, let's take a quick break from our podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode. It's going to be a great one, so make sure you stay with us till the end. I work as a software engineer and have been doing this for a decade. I build modern applications like SaaS, ERP, and CRM. If you want such a product or you want to improve what you already have, let us know. You can get in touch through our website or on LinkedIn. And now let's get back to the podcast.
I'll just say, first of all, that buy the book, and I think it makes sense. It's important to have a great unit test coverage and a great integration test coverage in your application, and have both, I think. My observation and the comment I made earlier is because from my experience in every team, every engineering teams I worked with, I saw that oftentimes there is more effort put into integration test instead of unit tests. Oftentimes, and there is a good reason for it. And actually, I even do it myself when I test my code. The reason is, with unit test, you freeze, you automate the behavior of a function or a piece of code or a class, if you're using an object-oriented language. And with an integration test, you freeze and automate. You guarantee the behavior of your application, or a piece of your application. So it's very different, because usually the assumption is, well, if my application always behaves this way, and I'm sure I automated every single thing that my application could be doing, why do I need to do all of that testing at the function level, right? Deeper in the code. So I think oftentimes it's just faster to test at the end of the chain and assume that all sub parts of the chain, which is your application code, will work as they should, because I tested the top level input and output, and it's okay, it's fine, it's enough. So for some applications, it's enough. I don't think it solves everything. Like sometimes having having both great coverage of unit test and integration test also has a lot of advantages. For instance, assessing the performance of a functions. For instance, if you have performance issues at the integration test level, it's really hard to dig deep dive and understand exactly where is the bottleneck, the performance bottleneck. So that's why when you have both visibility on both, it's actually much easier to figure it out. That said, what you mentioned about Dagger and the role of Dagger in that, in testing in general, it's interesting because for unit tests, you don't really need anything fancy, right? It's usually supported natively by your language and by the tooling of your language the language that you use. So you don't need anything fancy. Like running a unit test is usually, I say usually because it's not always the case, but usually cheaper to run. You can run it on your machine. The CI will run it without much effort. For integration test, it's usually not the case. And so oftentimes unit tests are done with the same language than that you use to write your application. But integration test, it's exactly when things get ugly because you want to use your actual application. So you will use, this is when you start using Bash and YAML, and it starts to be more and more complex and hard to maintain. But I believe that why having a test suite that is as important as your unit test, why doing one in your native language and not the other, just because you don't have the tooling, right? So Dagger indeed allows you to keep both the code of your application, the code of your unit test, and the code of your integration test all in the same language. And the Dagger engine will make sure that your integration tests are run efficiently, so parallelized, cached, meaning we don't rerun everything over and over again, reusable, exactly like you would make any piece of code reusable in your application using Dagger modules, and also portable, which means, hey, if I can run my unit test locally, why couldn't I run my integration test locally as well, right? So pretty much unifying all of these things I think it's Dagger is the missing element to this to finalize and I should even say to create this software factory that you need to use and to ship great products.
When I started to learn more about CI/CD, um, when I was a junior, I joined the team. We were like DevOps engineers, and we were building CIs to the company's different products. And I saw that the Jenkins was at that time was the dominant CI/CD tool. And now after I saw the GitLab kind of evolving in that area, and now I think they made extremely good progress. Um, and then after the EDO kind of came along, maybe the same time, I just learned about it later for some reason. But I feel like so these three things are three tools that I feel like really dominate the market. And what do you think? Dagger, it's going to be a competition for these platforms, or Dagger um, try to integrate these, so or trying to be a tool that can be integrated into GitLab or ADO or Jenkins or any other tool that solves the same similar problems.
Yeah, so well, great question. Dagger indeed integrates, so we don't try to integrate, we do actually. So the way it works is yeah, Dagger can run on Jenkins, can run on GitHub and GitHub Actions, whether it's a self-hosted runner or like GitHub managed runners. Dagger works in both. We even see your local laptop, your development machine, as a CI infrastructure because Dagger can
Mm-hmm.
run on it, and the same things that it runs on any other CI infra. The way we see CI systems is when you think about Jenkins or GitHub Actions, you actually have two sides on it. You have on one side the infrastructure of Jenkins, so the workers that can scale, um, the that get the dispatcher of jobs. Pretty much like the whole infrastructure piece and orchestration. And then you have on top of it the user experience that allows you to write your pipelines. In the case of Jenkins, it's the Jenkins file. Although I hear a lot about Groovy, and I'm laughing a bit because I hear a lot every single day. I hear someone complain about it, but everyone is using it when it's about Jenkins. And then on GitHub Actions or GitLab, you have YAML, so usually called a workflow, that defines your actual pipeline, and then You have GitHub Actions or just single commands and shell scripts that you can run inside your pipeline on steps and jobs. I think it's important to dissociate the two, the infrastructure on one side and the user experience for writing the pipeline on the other side. And so Dagger replaces the latter. Although it helps a lot with the first one as well, because it can simplify your infrastructure greatly. But the point is, as soon as you Daggerized your pipeline and your all of your CI/CD code, um, you basically have a lot less work on the infrastructure side, because the only thing you have to do is run Dagger efficiently, and Dagger doesn't need a lot of things. The whole thing is containerized, even the Dagger engine itself, and it becomes much simpler. But the point is, Dagger is not replacing Jenkins or GitLab or GitHub Actions runners. Instead, it can run within those or I should say, on top of those pieces of infrastructure. And even if at some point you're thinking, well, actually, I want to run my own workers, and I don't want to have a CI system that runs it. You can also deploy Dagger on let's say, I don't know, AWS EC2 instances, for instance, that runs great too. So yeah, that's a long answer.
When I was preparing for this episode, I read that there's a rumor about the GitHub Actions was originally going to be something like that what the Dagger is today.
Oh, you mean the? Well, actually, I'm not sure. I didn't hear the same rumors, but I can tell you what I heard. That makes me think of what you just said.
Hmm.
Um, when we explain the reusability of CI, especially modules, and the fact that the pipeline is containerized with Dagger, oftentimes I hear, oh, it looks a lot like GitHub Action, because
Mm.
GitHub Actions has a workflow, and also you have actions that you can reuse. And so, what's the difference? And so I got that question a lot, actually, in the past. And my answer is, it's true that from I think actually when GitHub Actions was designed, it was designed with this mindset. But there is a
Mm.
key difference between what Dagger provides and what GitHub Actions is today. The main difference is GitHub. So GitHub is, it's a closed service. I mean, pretty much, it's
Yes.
not an open ecosystem. So if you want to bet entirely on GitHub Actions, you will use and possibly write some days actions that can only run on GitHub.
Yeah.
That's it, right? And so, and actually running GitHub Actions outside of GitHub is a big ask. I know there is a project that exists that is doing that. Although, all due respect, it's people complain about it oftentimes when I hear it's used, because it actually tries to replicate all of GitHub Actions and the runtime, and so it's very heavy,
Mm.
and the constraint is to actually stick to the design of GitHub Actions that was designed for GitHub, not for running on local machines. So the
Mm.
result is not that great. I think, yes, indeed, Dagger provides a, a way to reuse the code, and in a way that is open, where basically with an open source project where you can look at the code of the runtime, and you can run it anywhere on GitHub, including GitHub, actually. But you're not. The point is, you won't be stuck with GitHub. If you want to move to GitLab at some point, you can, and you won't have to change the code of your pipelines. So that's the key difference.
So I think the Dagger team was really reshaping the industry with the Docker. And it just happened. I think it's undeniable, and it feels like the team just doing that again. So with the Dagger, and now it just I just wanted to ask that how it's keep happening with the team that always try to um reshaping or changing the industry heavily.
Well, it's never a goal, right? I mean, it's ambitious for sure, but and by the way, thank you for saying that. What I mean by that is if you ask like what's the how do you create a product like Docker and now Dagger that people use and changes the way they work.
Mm,
I would say that's actually the only goal is to make something that is useful to people, right? And I think the recipe is not so different from um, it's not so different from creating any other companies. You know, you start with a problem
mm,
to solve, and you try to solve it as best as you can,
mm,
and then you see what happens. And it's true indeed. You know, when I left Docker in 2018, I was amazingly surprised that it was everywhere. Like everywhere is using Docker. Everyone is using Docker today, and I use it myself, and it was very yeah. It feels a bit strange to have built such a product with a great team that now everyone is kind of changed the way people work. Um, with what I mean by it was not the goal. It was just same thing. Like we identified the problem back in the days, and
mm,
we thought, oh, there is a missing product there. That there is something that people need to use that will make their life easier. And the same thing happens with Dagger today. Those things take time, right? It took us like pretty much 10 years at Docker for
mm,
you know even when so I mentioned at the beginning dot cloud. So dot cloud was a platform as a service based on containers.
mm,
We were already building a containers runtime back in the days, and so
mm,
those things take way longer than people think when they start hearing about a product taking shape, and a few months later like, oh wow, it's amazing, everyone is starts using it and everyone is talking about it. Well, it's because
mm,
there are literally years of work before that. But this work is nothing else than talking to people, listening to people, listening to the problems they have, and trying to solve them that for them. That's pretty much the only recipe.
how much of the experience and knowledge can be leveraged from building the Docker to building Dagger as a company and as a product?
Yeah, well, a lot of things are being reused, starting with our own experience. You know, the three founders. So we were together at Docker, and we made a lot of mistakes along the way. You know, we were younger than today. Um, well, we made tons of mistakes. We could do another podcast just on that. It would take a long time, but yeah, the TLDR is you know there are mistakes are great because you know what not to do, but it's
Hmm.
necessarily you don't necessarily know what to do when you start again. So that this is pretty much what's called experience, right? You know what to avoid, but I would lie if I would tell you, oh yeah, the second time we knew exactly what we needed to do. You know, very easy. No, it's never the case. Um,
Hmm.
we just know that we should avoid certain mistakes that we made in the past, such as hiring too fast, not taking care of the company culture, um, you know, like taking care of the quality and the reliability on the product from the early days. They are just like a tiny bit of context behind the gigantic catalog of mistakes we built in our based on our experience. And then there are some things that also worked great that we want to do again. Like for instance, the fact that Docker was a great and still is actually a great open source project that gather the community of developers around the world that
Hmm.
participate into making the product even better. So that's something that I don't think a lot of people are able to do well, that I think we did well, and that we are still working hard to do as well with Dagger today, with a
Mhm.
community, an open community of people who join, and people have access easily to what the team is building. There is like a deep blend between the the Dagger employees and
Mhm.
the community and open source contributors. I'm sure that if you go to the channel today and start discussing with people, you want to know right away who's an employee and who's not, because everyone is just joining to for fun and
Mhm.
and and gathering around problems they share, and discussing about how they, this or that could be solved. Um, and so yeah, this openness is not just about code. For me,
Mhm.
open source is not just about code. It's a mindset. It's a mindset of how to design a product, and I think commercial products as well. So to me, it's not like open source is just for projects and it's free, and closed
Mhm.
source is just for products and they're commercial. No, I believe this is wrong. Um, and so we are building an open project and product today with Dagger,
Mhm.
and so, and we indeed are building a business alongside it, but I think it works nicely with the open source mindset.
Do you think that the Docker and the Dagger also could be built by people who are not technical? And I think in your case, or in the Dagger team case, um, it looks like, and I'm pretty sure it is a hardcore tech product. So could be built by um managers involved who are not technical at all, or just know a little bit about tech.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Well, I don't know, but at least um, I can tell you how it is for us. Like when the way we build Docker and the way
Mhm.
we are building now Dagger is we are three founders who are fairly
Mhm.
technical. We are initially software engineers, the three of us, and we have we both for Docker and Dagger, we actually built something that we wanted to use ourselves. And so while
Mhm.
I was still part of Docker, I was still using Docker, and even in the early days of Docker, before the 1.0, I was using
Mhm.
Docker at home on my personal projects, and my hobby was deeply linked to my work, and that's really
Mhm.
how I like to do things. And for Dagger today, it's the same thing. Like I'm using Dagger on some personal projects, and so my point is I have opinions on how things should be made, and it's the
Mhm.
same thing for my co-founders Andrea and Solomon. We all have opinions. We are deeply passionate about that space and what the product does and solves. And so I could imagine. Well, if the question is, could such a company be built by people who are not technical? I maybe maybe I just don't know it. The thing so for instance, what I learned at YC is um, it's important to have at least one technical co-founder
Mhm.
in founders. So it's very, I think it's important, um, and especially for product like Dagger that aims target software developers. It's important to understand them, and how
Mhm.
best can you understand them if you are also yourself a software engineer, right? So
Mhm.
so I would say, yeah, that's my simple answer based of my experience. We are actually very technical on the founder side, um, and I can tell you we argue often about what to change and what to build all the
Yeah, I
time.
can imagine that.
So that actually creates other challenges in terms of how do we split the decision making, because we don't want to end up in a deadlock. And I think we did a great work at Dagger, in the sense that we are 3 software engineers, but we also have you know, different strengths. So we try to maximize the way we spend our time to yeah, make sure we go fast. And
Last question would be, even though we thought about it a little bit, but how people can start using Dagger. What would you recommend the people who just learn about Dagger in this episode? Where to start, where to join?
of course, yeah, so I think you should go to dagger.io, dagger.io, and go through the docs. Like, quickly, you have a link at the top of the website that shows you the documentation. The documentation has a quick start that
Mhm.
basically show you how to build a Dagger module easily. And the other thing I would say is, I would also join our resources. I would consult the other resources that we have. So join our Discord server and ask questions
Mhm.
along the way. Join the community code every 2 weeks to look at demos. And I would also say, we have a large number of videos on our YouTube channel
Mhm.
that you can see, that show you demo from the community calls, but also guides from how to do certain things from the docs, for instance. So yeah, we have a bunch of resources, but the point is, um, it's an open community, and you should never hesitate to talk to people. There is absolutely no stupid question whatsoever. Every question is a great question.
Thank you again for joining. I think it was a great episode. I learned a lot, and the whole journey and the whole thing I just learned about Dagger, have it get built. It was truly inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for the invitation. It was fun.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit subscribe. If you haven't seen our previous episodes yet, make sure to check them out. All details about the podcast can be found on the Follow the Pattern website. The link is available in the description below. Join the Follow the Pattern Discord server, where you can ask questions about the podcast, and you can even submit questions to our next guest. The Discord link is also available in the description below. See you in the next episode.